Hi, I'm Larissa D, and you're watching Tech Talk for Hammond.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everyone. I thought what Kevin asked me to do tonight was to not talk about a particular topic, topic-specific thing, but to basically tell you guys about my career and my career progression, and through the various companies that I've run, give you sort of lessons learned and sort of the benefit of some of the things that I've dealt with over the years. So I'll throw it out and say I'm going to start from the beginning, which is when I was born, and quickly go through. What's that?
What year was that?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. And then quickly take you through the early part and get right up to today with Axonify. If you have questions, just shout them out. I'm happy to stop and answer questions through the piece. I could talk about this stuff for hours, and so Kevin's going to give me the hook when I'm getting close so that I don't go over and I manage to cover most of it. So anyway, I grew up in Ottawa. I actually wasn't born in Ottawa. I was born in Newfoundland. And I was a mistake. My 20-year-old father knocked up my 18-year-old mother in the back of a police car, no less. And I came into the world. And my parents stayed in Newfoundland. My father was an RCMP officer, and he stayed in Newfoundland for about 4 years. And then he was posted to Ottawa. And so I grew up in Ottawa, did all my schooling years in Ottawa. And when I was 16 years old, I started to date a guy who was in first year university at Waterloo. And so 3 years later, when I was choosing, or two years later, I guess, when I was choosing which university to go to, I just picked the university that my boyfriend was at, and actually picked the program that he was in, which was accounting at Waterloo. And so that's how I chose my career. It was a genius move, chose it by dating a guy. As it turned out, it actually was a genius move. I promptly broke up with him. It was the turkey dump situation. Come Thanksgiving, he and I broke up, and I started to date somebody else, but I continued my education at Waterloo, and I ended up getting a Master of Accounting at University of Waterloo, becoming a chartered accountant. So by formal education, I'm a CA. I'm not a technology person. I can tell you, never in a million years did I expect back then that I would end up running technology companies, but I just sort of fell into it. So I did my practical experience as a CA with KPMG and predecessor companies, and that was both in Ottawa and then in Waterloo. And it was a couple of years after I moved back to Waterloo that I was recruited by a client of mine, which was a public company in Waterloo called Electrohome, to come and join their corporate finance team. So I went into the corporate finance group, and what I did for a number of years there was essentially raise capital. The company was constantly out of money. We had a bunch of different divisions. We had a big projection systems division, which is now Christie Digital, the second largest projector manufacturer worldwide. We owned some TV stations. We owned, which we sold to Bayton Broadcasting, which subsequently sold it to Bell Media. So CTV, we were the single largest shareholder in the CTV network, actually. We owned a display monitor business, and a variety of other minor things. So we had sort of this corporate enterprise at Electrohome that comprised a number of very disparate kinds of businesses. And I hate to say it, but Electrohome was not well managed, frankly. And so we were constantly running out of money. I had a boss. I was 27 years old when I went to work there, and I had a boss who was a gunslinger. And pretty quickly, his name was Dan, pretty quickly Dan would say to me things like, the bank's going to call this $20 million loan, and we need $30 million to finance this thing, so you got to go out and find $30 million. And I would be like, oh, okay, like, where do I start? And he really pushed me hard to just figure stuff out. And so I spent a number of years working for Dan in just fear, constant state of fear and panic that somehow I was going to fail and not be able to go find that 30 million or figure out the problem with the other loan with G Capital in Chicago, or not be able to figure out how to deal with this business we had just bought, which was a dog. So I had a wild and crazy experience for a number of years. I was also corporate secretary at Electrohome, and I dealt with all of the legal sorts of issues. And so two experiences from Electrohome just sort of stand out in my mind. One was we bought a business in Carthage, Missouri that was really driven by the head of our display monitor business. So back at the time, we were the supplier to Bloomberg in New York City for specialized monitors for watching financial market stuff. And the Bloomberg business actually comprised half of the revenue of that entire division, that entire display monitor division. And literally overnight one night, we got an email from Bloomberg saying, effective next month, we're going to build these things ourselves. We're not going to outsource the build of these monitors to you. So half of the revenue went away literally overnight. They just took the rest of the inventory and it was gone. And what that did was expose that the other half of the revenue in the display monitor business was totally unprofitable. The only thing keeping that division afloat was that one piece of business. So there were hundreds of other customers in that division, but for the most part they were highly unprofitable, and Bloomberg was disguising that. So the heads of the division, rather than kind of deal with that issue, decided that we just needed to go out and buy some more stuff and pile it on and kind of replace that Bloomberg business. So I became part of a team of people that was tasked with doing due diligence on this company in Missouri that they had discovered was in the display monitor business. And so I flew down with a team of people that were marketing people and sales people and the heads of our division and engineers and various people involved in the business unit. And I had to do financial due diligence. And I realized within a day, I was there for 5 days, I realized within a day that it was a disaster. Nothing the CFO said to me was true. Everything he gave me was inaccurate. I didn't believe various payables and receivables were going to be resolved the way he said. I just one thing after the next that I did not believe. So when we all did our reports back to the board of directors and the CEO about the acquisition, I was the only one on that team of people who said, under no circumstances should we buy this thing. And the problem I had was I was 28 years old. I was by far and away the youngest person on the team, and I was the only one who wasn't personally incented to grow the division and keep it alive. So my agenda was different than everybody else's on that acquisition team. So what ended up happening was we bought it. And I had to go out and find $21 million to finance it. We actually bought it for $2 million of cash, and we assumed $9 million in accounts payable. So it was an $11 million purchase. And what happened was, I'll just move this once in a while so it doesn't go to sleep. What ended up happening was the first week after we did the acquisition, I get a call from the CFO and he says, I need $500,000 this week. And I was in charge of kind of funneling them the money. And so, all right, week one, 500K. So I wired him 500,000. And that was to resolve some old payables. Well, then the next week he needed 300,000. And then the week after that he needed 750. And the week after that he needed another 500. And so pretty quickly we chewed through like $7 million. And so I said to my boss at the time, this is, going south very, very quickly. There's no end in sight. And all these things that came out of nowhere were suddenly, we needed to build certain inventory. We had to write off inventory, that kind of thing. So I was told, just keep, giving them money. So literally it was a year. A year, and we blew through $21 million. We were at the top of the line of credit that I had obtained to do the acquisition and fund the business. And the bank called the loan and said, you know, we don't believe that this was a good deal, and there's no more money, and we want the loan paid down by, I think it was $7 million at the time. We want quick payment on the $7 million. And we didn't have it. We just didn't have it. So I had to go down to, it was Bank of Montreal, I had to go downtown to Toronto, to the 50th floor of that tower in Toronto, go into a darkened room with 4 guys in the workout group who were all wearing dark suits, and they sit you in a chair and they put a hot light bulb in your face, and one of the guys basically said to me, so you understand, you will pay $600,000 as a deposit this week, and you will pay the loan back within 60 days. You understand that? And you know, there I was shaking in my boots, and yes, I understand. What we ended up having to do was sell the shares in CTV to pay that loan back. So that's what caused that acquisition or that divestiture to take place. We made a pile of money on the CTV sale, but that's what that acquisition, the acquisition of the display monitor business resulted in. We had to sell another asset to be able to pay the loan back. So my boss said to me afterwards, for years, he said, you know, you should put on your resume that you were the only person on that team who said, run in the opposite direction. Everybody else was hot to trot to do the acquisition. And you know, look what the result was. So that story stands out in my mind just because it was such a disaster, and many other things occurred with that acquisition. We ended up selling the business actually to a US California-based acquirer for $1.5 million. And so from beginning to end, we had the business for about 1.5 years and spent well over $20 million getting it going nowhere. And then we sold it, we dumped it for $1.5 million. So that was a disaster. The other story that stands out from electrical was back in the days when RIM was prior to being a public company. We had this huge machine in the back called an electromagnetic testing machine. We actually did electromagnetic testing for the early versions of the BlackBerry. And we had a guy who was in charge of doing the testing. RIM had just landed their biggest contract ever with a company. It was for $8 million, and I forget how many BlackBerries. So we did the testing on the latest unit, gave the report, they went and built the BlackBerries, and then 6 months later came back to us and said that the testing was flawed and that the units didn't work, and they sued us for $13 million. So I was in charge of dealing with that lawsuit, and the fellow on our side who did the testing was a guy who, frankly, I'm quite sure did the right testing. There were other reasons why the BlackBerries failed, but he did the right testing, but what he didn't do is document what he did. And to make matters worse, he was a terrible witness. He was under cross-examination, you know, it just completely had a meltdown. And I discovered that because I actually had our litigator do a mock trial with this guy. And got him in a room, got a court reporter, and had our lawyer go at him like the RIM lawyer would. And this poor guy, like I wouldn't have wanted to be in his shoes, frankly, but this poor guy just had a complete meltdown. And my lawyer said to me, like, there's no way. We have to go to mediation and try to settle this thing. Regardless of, you know, who is right or wrong, we're going to fail because he will not stand up on the stand. So I went to mediation, and RIM had one lawyer, and their very first corporate lawyer had just been hired, and they had an accounting guy there. And we were sitting across the table in the mediation room, and there was a judge. And the idea is to try to come to some resolution through the course of the day and agree on a settlement. So, long story short, we get to the end of the day, and they made an offer. We could pay $250,000 in cash, or we could pay $100,000 and take 50 BlackBerries for 3 years on a 3-year plan. And I'd never seen a BlackBerry before that day. And I was so cheesed off because through the entire day, the lawyer and the accountant sat across from me, 5 feet across the table, using this thing back and forth and giggling to themselves and laughing. And I thought, that is the rudest thing I've ever seen in my life. And if that's what they want me to take 50 of those things, forget it. So I paid the $250,000 and settled the suit and refused to take the BlackBerries. Then I also had an offer to buy 1,000 shares of RIM when they went public prior to the IPO. As part of the deal, you know, they give out to people, certain people. And I refused to buy those 1,000 shares, which I regretted, frankly. But anyway, so those two stories from Elector Homes sort of kicked things off for me. The acquisition that we did that got me into running technology companies was a company in California called FakeSpace. They had 20 people. They were 3 Stanford grads. And the technology was a very, very high-end, I forgot to change the thing here. Oh, there we go. Very, very high-end virtual reality. So very high fidelity virtual reality. So things like The Cave, if any of you are familiar with that, or if you've seen the Hive down in the Communitech Hub in Waterloo. You know, large room-sized environments where you visualize images in 3D. And so we had a variety of desks and peripheral devices, rooms, huge walls. It was very, and is very, very cool stuff. You know, when all of us think of 3D, we often think of the glasses and head-mounted devices and things like that. These were used for very high fidelity applications. Our largest customer was Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico. LANL, as they're called, is way up on a mesa in New Mexico, and they design and detonate nuclear bombs. And so getting up on the mesa is very, very difficult. As a Canadian national, it took me 6 months of clearance to be able to actually only go in one building up there. But we built rooms for them in which they detonated nuclear bombs. And the value of that was that they didn't have to do it out in the desert, because when they would detonate a bomb in the desert, essentially in an instant, you end up creating miles of green glass because the sand turns to glass instantly and kills basically everything that's within the range of the bomb. So FakeSpace was an awesome, very interesting technology. It was a troubled company when we bought it. The 3 founders had no idea what to do with it. And so what ended up happening was my boss at Elector Home became the CEO, and I became the CFO of FakeSpace. So we both left Elector Home formally and started to build that business. We did a quick acquisition of a company competitor in Detroit. And what that left was 5 companies worldwide doing what we did, including us. So there were 5 of us sort of competing for business in things like military, the education sector, oil and gas was a big sector, automotive design, things where you needed big images and high fidelity images to design. And you could render those images in 3D and see things that you might not be able to see on a 2D screen, or in the case of oil and gas, the way that they used to discover oil and gas was take seismic shots of the ocean or the terrain, and then look at literally inches and inches of numbers on pages to try to figure out anomalies where the oil and gas was. So what we were able to do was to render the seismic shots in a 3-dimensional image, and they could see under the ocean exactly where that pocket of oil or gas was, and then put the hoses down directly into that pocket, versus taking a guess based on numbers and then drilling dry holes, which cost about $20 million, or at the time, $20 million. That was 10 years ago to drill a dry hole. So huge value in that kind of thing. So my boss started to run FakeSpace, and he had visions of grandeur. We were going to grow by 30% a year. The market was going to grow by 50% a year, and we were going to get the lion's share of it because we were the best company in the space. And when things didn't happen that way, things weren't growing as quickly, we were constrained by market size. So one of the biggest lessons I learned out of Fake Space is know your market and know the compound annual growth rate of your market and be able to predict that with some level of accuracy. We were essentially dealing with a $100 million a year annual spend that was not growing, and 5 of us were going after that $100 million. And it didn't matter what we had or what we did, the market itself was not going to grow dramatically. So he didn't believe that, and we ended up raising a bunch of capital and blowing through the money very, very quickly. And then 2001 happened, and essentially all the money was gone. And we were just about to close on another venture capital deal, and the markets completely tanked. So fortunately, we were able to close on that money at the last possible minute, but my boss hadn't been entirely truthful with the investors and the board, and they invited him to go work somewhere else. So they turned to me and they said, this thing needs a bit of a turnaround. Can you do that? And I said, for sure. My boss, just to give you a bit of color about him, Dan was a brilliant, brilliant man, absolutely brilliant, genius. But he was your very, very typical bully boss. So Dan was a guy who screamed at the top of his lungs at people, humiliated people regularly. He was just an awful person in a lot of ways. And people asked me for years, how did you manage to work for the guy? And I worked for him because, for the first 3 years, I was just dumb and scared. And for the rest of it, I had it out with him. And like I told him, I had a big to-do with him one day, and I told him never again was he going to do that to me. And he didn't. So I stood up to him. And but many other people did not. And so by the time Dan got taken out, basically I was running the company anyway because nobody wanted to deal with Dan. So, he was making all the executive decisions, but from a day-to-day operational standpoint, I was really running the company. So I took over Fake Space and did a bit of a turnaround. And a couple of years later, one of those 4 other competitors offered to buy us. So I saw what the shareholders wanted to do. We were primarily venture owned at that point. And so I ended up selling the company to this competitor based in Iowa called Mechdyne. And I spent a year working for the combined company, basically helping them get it integrated. And the biggest lesson I learned out of that little experience was I had a lot of inklings about the CEO of Mechdyne before I sold the company to him. He was an aerospace engineer, brilliant guy again, but extraordinarily, whereas I'm the carrot to motivate people, he was the stick. He was a big stick when it came to dealing with people. So very quickly, he and I started to get into arguments about the fact that despite having millions of dollars in the bank, he liked to pay his people a month in arrears, once a month, when we were on bi-weekly payroll. And the reason he liked to do that was because it saved him $200 a month in ADP processing fees for payroll. And, we had a team of guys go to Nigeria to do an install for 8 weeks at Chevron. And when they got off the plane, they were taken by a machine gun to the basement of the airport. They were held in a room for hours, had their passports taken away. They thought they were going to die that day. And these were a bunch of 20-year-old guys. And finally, somebody from Chevron came and got them, thank God. And they spent 8 weeks in the jungle doing this installation. And when they got home, the CEO of Mechdyne asked me how I was planning to get the 17 cents or 25 cents or 40 cents a day that they didn't spend on their meal allowance back from each of them. And, you know, I said, really? Are you kidding me? And no, he was quite serious. He was wondering what the process was of how I figured out that the $50 we gave them was deducted, and, you know, how do we get that extra money back they didn't spend? So I had conversations like that with him for a year, and then I had enough and decided I don't need it, and decided to leave, and with a plan to take a year off. And pretty quickly, I think it was like a week, I got pulled into a bunch of consulting things that I wasn't intending to do. And that led very quickly to a company called RSS Solutions. RSS Solutions was a venture-backed technology company that sold very complicated software to optimize shop floor production for discrete manufacturers. So what that means is a bunch of gobbledygook. What that means is we built software that if you're, say, an airplane manufacturer, you build one airplane every 6 months or one engine every 6 months, and it involves thousands to tens of thousands of parts and thousands of operations and thousands of people. How do you optimize the build of that thing to meet a target deadline for delivery when every day something goes wrong? So every day people don't show up for work, or they're sick, or you don't get a part from a supplier on time, that kind of thing. So we optimize that process to help them get on-time delivery. Trouble with the company, I knew going in that the company was troubled. There's a reason, there's a mushroom cloud there underneath the name of the company. The company was, I didn't realize this, but the day I got there, it was founded by 3 brothers and their father. And the day I got there, I asked the brother who had been the CEO, so all 3 brothers stayed in the business. Their father was the chairman of the board. I asked the brother who had been the CEO for the financial statements, just so I could get a handle on what the financial condition was. And he couldn't produce them for me, so I ended up just sort of cobbling together what information I could. And within a day of being on the job, realized that we had $140,000 payroll to make on Friday, and there was $70,000 in the bank. And so I called him in and I said, hey Mike, where's the other bank account? And he looks at me and says, what are you talking about? And I said, well, we got $140,000 of money to shove to ADP on Friday, and there's like $70K in the bank account. So there must be another account. And he looks at me and he goes, there's no other account. Oh, so we were out of cash. And he had no idea, the investors had no idea, and I had 45 people sitting out on the other side of my door expecting to get paid. So scramble. The VC ended up funding us money, but I had to write a personal check to make payroll that week. And I can tell you, my husband was not impressed. He, when I went home and told him that night we were writing a little check on the line of credit, he was not exactly thrilled that I'd taken that job. That was, for me, 2 years of probably the most heavy lifting I'll ever do. The market was dead. The product was awful and didn't fit the market. We had a bunch of people in the company that shouldn't have been there. There were funky deals that they had cut with customers that made no sense whatsoever. I ended up giving money back, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, back to customers that we had collected money from, where there was no way we were going to be able to deliver on what was promised. So that company was a disaster from beginning to end. And literally it was all I could do to get the thing sold for the venture firm. Which fortunately ended up happening 2 years later. But the best story out of RSS Solutions, 4 months into the job, I was in San Francisco at a conference for software executives. 3 days, the last night, I won a laptop for this story, by the way. I was in the cocktail party to close it out, hundreds of people in the room, and I was just, walking around with my glass of wine, trying to network. And I happened to stop and talk to one guy, literally in a sea of people, asked him what he did, told him that I recalled the name of the company for some reason. He tells me, I realize they're semi-competitive. And then I said, oh, I know why I know the name of your company. We had a sales guy start 4 months ago, shortly after me. And he works in Chicago out of his home office. And I think he was interviewing with you guys at the same time. He mentioned the name of your company to me. And he says, oh, really, what's his name? And I said, it's Gary 6, like the number, S-I-X. He goes by G6. I think he fancied himself like 007. So he goes by G6. So this guy looks at me and he goes, big guy, like 6'4", 400 pounds. I go, yeah. Do you know him? And he says, yeah, he's a personal friend of mine. And I said, oh, where do you know him from? We work together at Numetrics and I2 and a bunch of companies. Oh, and so he goes, so he works for you, eh? And I said, yeah, like since October, whenever it was. And the guy just turned away and he had a full glass of wine and he downed it in one gulp. And he just stared at the ceiling. And so I looked at him and I said, does he work for you too? And he goes, yeah, since October. And so this guy, of all the people in the room that I could have spoken to that night, I happened to stop at the one guy who hired the same sales guy as us. And we ended up spending the next 4 hours together, going through the previous 4 months, and ended up firing the guy on the following Monday. So, okay, I've got to rush here. So RSS Solutions, I ended up getting sold to a strategic acquirer in Atlanta, which ultimately sold to SAP. Then I did a bunch more consulting. I was asked to be the first executive in residence at Communitech in Waterloo, and was very quickly joined by Ron Newman, who's in the room and many of you know. And so Ron and I worked alternate half weeks and basically set up the program for Communitech to mentor early stage technology companies. And as it happened, Ron was on the job when 2 guys walked in, Ilya Grigoric and Kevin Thomason, and they had a little company called 8RSS. And Ron started working with Kevin and Ilya, actually started working part-time for them with the company, got it financed. I was an angel investor in that original round along with Ron and some others, and a venture firm. And several months later, Ron, unfortunately, for a whole bunch of other reasons, had to go take care of some other stuff. And I was invited to come in and run the company. And so post-drink, we changed the name to what the online product name was, from 8RSS. I got tired of having people ask me if we had something to do with AIDS. We were a web-based social media metrics aggregator. So I ran that company for 3.5 years, and we ended up about a year before I sold it, being approached by one of our customers, which is a big ad network in California, to buy the company. And they hounded us and hounded us and hounded us for a year. And finally, eventually, they agreed to all of our terms. So I was in California and I handshook on that deal. It was a Monday night around 9 o'clock. And we went out for dinner and we celebrated. And I jumped in the cab on the way back to the hotel, whip out my email. And, I have an email from Avinash Kaushik at Google, who some of you may know was the Google Analytics evangelist at Google. And he says, hey, Carol, haven't talked to you in 6 or 7 months. I'd love you to set up a web demo of post-drink analytics for this other guy in Google Analytics. So I said, well, hey, I'm here. Actually, Ilya's here. We could come over tomorrow. So we did. We went over, and 15 minutes into the demo, the guy says, I want to buy the company. And I said, oh, that's a problem. And he goes, why? And I said, because I sold it last night. And he says, are you kidding me? No, I'm not kidding you. And so we ended up going to dinner with this guy. Fortunately, I hadn't signed anything with the ad network. Unfortunately for them, fortunately for us. They were a very naive acquirer. So anyway, we go to dinner, Ilya and I, and this guy, Phil Mewey, and he was trying to get out of me, you know, purchase price and all that kind of stuff, which I wasn't telling him. And finally he looks at Ilya across the table and he goes, so all that purchase price stuff aside, how would you feel to have everything you spent the last 3 years of your life building being used by the entire internet? And so Ilya, you know, sitting there, 26 years old, says, that would be awesome. And I said, shut up. So we ended up selling the company to Google 12 weeks later. And the entire company, pretty much, except for me and a couple of others, moved to California and worked on the Google Analytics team. They redid PostRank in Google Analytics, launched that last spring, and then they kind of dispersed most of them to other teams. So the PostRank experience was entirely wonderful. The biggest lessons there, I can tell you, and I said this from the outset with Ilya, what are we going to sell to somebody? I understand you've got this really cool free web tool, but what are we going to sell? And he didn't care. He honestly, what are you talking about? I don't care. And it took about a year for Ilya to figure out that, you know, he's 22 years old, right? He just wanted a genius young man. He wanted to build cool stuff. And I said to him a year into it, so it's like this. If you don't build this, which was what we ended up selling to Google, if you don't build this analytics dashboard, I gotta go raise some more capital now, and your big chunk of ownership in this company, because we don't have anything to sell to anybody, like the science experiment is done. We need to sell something, or your ownership is about to get ground down to about jack shit. So how about that? And he looked at me and he goes, oh. And so he went and built this dashboard, and that's ultimately what we sold to Google. So the lesson there is don't just build stuff because it scratches your itch. If you're building a company, you have to build something somebody's going to pay you $1 or more for. Otherwise, you're going to get nowhere fast, and believe me, I've lived it. So jumping to the final thing. Oh, I didn't even show you the PostRank logo. Here we go, Axonify. So when I sold PostRank to Google in June of 2011, Google actually asked me to go work for them in Mountain View, and I didn't want to do that. I always kind of consult with about 10 companies on the side, and one of them was this company. The original founders, about a year before, had asked me to help them with this little thing they had accidentally invented and didn't know what to do with. They were two 70-year-old marketing professionals, not tech people, not software people, but they conceived and had this little thing built for a customer that worked really, really well. And they didn't know how to build a company around it. So in helping them for the year, I realized like they don't get it at all. They never will. And so I tried to help them hire people actually to run the company. Wasn't successful finding anybody who wanted to do it because it just wasn't interesting and sexy enough. It's an e-learning tool that was being sold to the retail market. So, you know, you can't get kind of uglier than that. E-learning, learning, and retail. So when just in helping them, I knew that there was the nugget of something really, really good there. It had a huge, huge market potential. So what they were doing wasn't being done by anybody else. And it sort of incorporated trends that were happening in the market. So gamification of learning. E-learning generally actually has a massive amount of momentum right now. And down to the level of the individual. So it's almost like a consumer-based learning project or product for the corporate enterprise. And so when I sold PostRank, I agreed to come on and join the company. They called it 17 Muscles at the time. And after taking the company out and trying to get it financed and having many VCs laugh at me about the name 17 Muscles, I decided we needed to rebrand. So we ended up going through that exercise and calling it Axonify. I closed on a seed round last March. We had 4 people, myself, a VP sales, who I worked with before, and 2 what are called instructional designers. And today we have 16 full-time staff, 2 part-time. I just signed another term sheet on Friday with a venture firm out of New York City. So we've just raised another $3.5 million. And we went from having 4 prospects in March, 4 prospect companies, to now dealing with about 125 active prospects in the retail market and other markets, adjacent markets like hotel chains and casinos and cruise ships, things that exhibit hourly paid, thousands of workers, very high turnover, lack of employee engagement, and they want to spend 90 seconds to 3 minutes a day playing a game and learning something that they need to know to do their jobs well. So that's essentially what we do. We will save Walmart next year, one of our customers, about $300 million. They spent $1 billion last year just in their 130 distribution centers in the US. They have 70,000 employees in those DCs, and they spent $1 billion on accidents. So one of the biggest issues in retail is accidents in their stores and distribution centers. And we did a 6-month pilot for Walmart in 8 DCs, and we reduced those medical accidents by 50 to 70% over that 6-month period from the previous year. So they were astounded, and we should be under contract with Starbucks. We just did a big demo for Nike, Microsoft. That the brand names are all the ones that you guys would know. So super excited. This company is going to be absolutely huge. And the biggest lesson you can take away from this one is know the market size. If nothing else, understand your market size and the fit of your product to that market and the value that you offer that is differentiated from everybody else. And if you can stay out ahead, you will win. So our goal is to be the winner in the category that we serve. We will be the winner in the category, and work with people you love. So this is the first company I've done where I've been able to handpick almost every single person I'm working with. I've either worked with them before or consulted with companies where they were working and got to know them that way. And be very careful about who you choose to work with, especially in early stage tech, where you're picking your co-founders. I've seen tons of co-founder issues, and so you want to be very careful about that as you build your business.
Hi fans for Tech Talk for Ham On. Do not forget to subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook.